Dear learners, I welcome you back to another session of Research Methodology for Tourism and Hospitality Management. We have been going through the sampling process in research. In the past modules, we started with qualitative research sampling techniques, and we have briefly gone through the process. And in the last module, in detail, we discussed the sampling mechanism used in quantitative research. Hope you remember probability sampling and non-probability sampling types. Today, we will be continuing with some practical aspects of this sampling procedure, and we will be referring to some textbooks and research articles in this regard. So once again, I welcome you all to today's module. Let us see what we are going to discuss in this module. At first, we will be discussing various factors and how these factors impact the choice of sampling. We will also go through quickly secondary data, and in the last part of today's module, this will discuss on the methods of data collection, mainly primary data collection. A number of factors influence the choice of sampling. This particular slide indicate sampling technique, sampling frame, advisable sample size, and the geographical area that suits to each sampling procedure. So let us start one by one. We have seen simple random sampling as one of the type of probability sampling. As a researcher, how we fix the number of samples? There are different procedures that are statistical or theoretical concepts which determine the sample size. So let us take a small sample size to be fixed. In such case, simple random sampling is advisable. So what is the small sample size here? Mean anything near 30 or up to 400, 500, this many number of samples. Simple random sampling, this facilitates the researcher in a number of ways, because it helps collecting the data quickly, and if you have a sample frame that allows you to determine the sample size precisely. Since the small sample size is required, you can have a precise sampling frame as well. So next point here to be noted is, face-to-face data collection is possible, and if the geographical area is small, this allows the researcher go to the field and collect the data straight away from the field, so that you can establish a contact with the respondent. So what did you learn, my dear students? Simple random sampling frame can be accurately made, and this sampling frame can be accessible because the sample size is small. The enumerator or the data collecting person, he can collect the data one to one. Similarly, in systematic sampling, same principles are applied almost. The sampling frame can be accurately made and it can be accessible too. And sample size, it can be large as 500 or even up to less than 1000, it would be advisable. Face-to-face depends upon the sample size and the time that you are having. So this is again taking place in a small area. Remember, concentrated here means the area of your study. So the area of study is small, limited. You can either choose simple random sampling or systematic sampling. Now let us see stratified sampling. Stratified sampling demands the area has to be divided into different stratas, that means different segments. So the researcher here have to divide the sampling frame into different stratas, and if the area is large, the researcher cannot go or personally establish a contact to collect the data. So here the person may be appointing enumerators or data collecting personnel. So there is no one-to-one contact in this case. The area would be large, so we cannot have a kind of concentrated sample size gathered through stratified random sampling. In cluster sampling, the researcher has to divide the sampling frame based upon the clusters. So the cluster here means homogeneous character respondents living in different localities. So as a researcher, it would be difficult to collect the data personally. Again, the enumerator or a data collecting personnel visit the field and get the data. So the factor here is, as a researcher, you may not establish a face-to-face contact. If the area is small and if the sample size is further small, then only face-to-face contact could be established. In cluster sampling, normally large geographical areas comes into the context. So in such a case, when we divide large area into smaller clusters and from the clusters the sample units are identified randomly, it becomes a challenge for the researcher to reach into the locality and establish contact with the respondents personally. In the last part here is multi-stage sampling. In multi-stage sampling, again the coverage is large, the geographical area is pretty large, so the individual may not be able to establish a one-to-one contact, and the fragmentation, like you have to divide the sample frame from stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 2 to stage 3. So different levels you have to divide the segment, and in such case again we need the personnel to collect the data or the enumerators help as the area is pretty large. Now while going through this table, you could have got an idea that what factors impact your decision making while choosing a particular sampling procedure. It also matters to the research question. The research area that you address, if it demands a representation of a large geographical area, then it would be better to go ahead with multi-stage sampling. Let us move into the next phase. In terms of qualitative data, we have seen different types, and this starts from like quota sampling, purposive sampling, snowball sampling and convenient sampling. So what matters here? The representativeness. In terms of quota sampling, the sample size that you choose, we cannot claim it precisely represent the population, can be reasonably. So the outcome of the research, how you generalize from based on quota sampling, we can't guarantee the results apply to the entire population. So it could be a claim if we do so. What is the control level? The control level is relatively high in terms of collecting the data. The researcher can meet the individual and spend time with the respondent, in which the researcher has more choice or more control can be exercised while collecting the data. In purposive sampling, the representativeness of the sample, it is low, and you could also see in snowball sampling the same thing, the representativeness is low. Why it is low? The reason is being the samples that a researcher choose is completely based upon the researcher's wisdom. That researcher believe that a particular sample would give the required result. So in this case, purposive sampling and snowball sampling, the representativeness or generalization of the results are comparatively low when you compare with quota sampling. The control over sample size is quite low in snowball sampling, but it is reasonable in purposive sampling. Why it is quite low in snowball sampling? I told you in the previous module that In snowball sampling, at first the researcher come to contact with some respondent, and then the respondents will help the researcher to find out more contact. Slowly the level of reach of the researcher, it increases, and it reaches into such hands where the researcher may not be even knowing that individual. So there is no control over data collection or how the respondent understand the questions. This is also a matter to be taken care of. Convenience sampling process, where we apply the convenience of the researcher to identify the sample or to collect the data. There also the representativeness is very low. The generalization of result, it is very low, or you cannot compare the population with the study outcomes that you have. Control over sample size, that is sample content. Control over sample content is also low in convenience sampling. So when you make your dissertation, you have to identify a right method for collecting the data. So the first point comes into your mind, who will be your respondent? How you can reach to the respondent? And when you compare the cost, and also the time that you spend, you need a quick result. So in this case, it is up to the researcher and the research problem or the sources of fund. All these aspects play an important role while you collect the data. I hope you understood what I shared with you through these 2 slides. Now let us see what is meant by secondary data. We have seen primary data, the data collected first time from the target respondents. What is secondary data? Is secondary data useful for in tourism research? How researchers use secondary data? These are the things that we are going to discuss now. According to Saunders, there are 3 types of secondary data. The first one is documentary data, second is multiple sources, third one is survey based information. Let us start one by one. Documentary data, as you see, document, evidence, whatever is available in the document for research purposes, that we can say documentary data. For example, many meetings take place. The outcome of meetings are coming in the form of minutes or annual reports of the companies or quarterly reports of any organization about its performance. So such kind of written document, written material is falling under one category, documentary data. And these reports normally are published in books, journals or magazines. And it could be also non-written material, that can be pictures, paintings or videos. So let us see what kind of information is available around us. Remember, we see telecast of important personalities, that includes messages, that radio, there are talks, there are discussions. Man Ki Baat is one of the example I would like to take here. Our Honorable Prime Minister addresses the people of India through Man Ki Baat. In these talks, our Prime Minister reach out to the population, sharing the developments and what is going on in various fronts is communicated to a wider population. So if you take the recordings of Man Ki Baat, you can understand the time whenever Prime Minister addresses the population, if it is festival related or if it is related to certain events, it also comes into the context. So this is a source for a researcher. We can also see the newspaper publications. Newspapers publish the results of financial performance of different companies, maybe in the form of advertisement, or they may come out with the form of reports. If you want to know the progress of tourism sector in certain areas, it is always advisable to go through the business magazines or the news channels which are exclusively meant for business purposes and keep a document of the same. Similarly, you can also check any other formats of information which is available in the form of PDF files online or maybe published newsletters which will help the researcher as secondary information. Let me tell you, many researchers use panel data. What is panel data? Panel data is available data over a period of time, and that can be used to do analysis. So panel data help us to understand the trend. It helps us to understand even the future too. Predictions are possible using panel data. And the second level is multi-source information. Here the multiple sources secondary data include based on documentary or survey based information. Second is time series data, or third one is cohort studies. So three different types of multiple sources secondary data are documentary or survey based data, time series data, or cohort studies. Let us take the example of stock market. See, stock market performance, it varies time to time. So if you want to analyze, near to the time of budget, how stock market is performing, or when we take example of a company which is going to invest in Indian market, how the Indian market is accepting it, or what kind of trend you can find in Indian market. So time series data will help you to again understand the trend and predict it. Cohort can be a particular age group or a particular segment of population from which we collect the required information, and we define the cohort before we go ahead with the study. And this information is already published again in different websites or available forms of publications where the researcher depends upon. Secondary data is preferred by some researchers because it is easily available. Many of the researchers coming from economics or the students of economics prefer secondary data. We hear terms like GDP growth, employment opportunities, or we hear about the economic growth, different such kind of terms frequently used in economics, and the data which they depend is secondary data sources. Data collected through survey is the third type of data information for us. See, very recently Make My Trip conducted a survey among the tourists. The purpose was to understand the destination choice of Indian tourists. You would be surprised to see the number of visitors to foreign countries, what we call outbound tourism. It is tremendously growing. The growth in this segment is much higher in comparison to other segments. So the data collected by Make My Trip is quoted by a number of news channels, and it is also used in the newsletters, or you can find other online sources. The outcome of such surveys will be helpful for a researcher is concerned. Ad hoc surveys or sample surveys of India is another example. Government of India conduct lot of researches, and the outcome of these researches are available in different websites too. The ministries, they conduct studies, and the reports of these studies will help a researcher to use for their own researches. So students, we have seen number one primary data, number two secondary data. Now let us proceed into the next segment of this module. Let us see the first part here, method of data collection. That methods of data collection, here we will be discussing primary data collection methods. Remember, you are a student. When you go and collect the data, remember we have some topics to study, and that study involves observation of participant. So this is originally rooted in social anthropology developed in USA, and remember in the first modules I discussed about these Chicago schools. So here the individual, the person who collects the data through the form of observation, The researcher spent time with the respondent or the community so that the exact information could be obtained. Here a sense of identity is created through interaction, and the researcher move through differing social context or different situations. So the first aspect is participant observation. It is further divided into 4 levels. Number 1 is complete participant, and number 2 is complete observer. There are 2 situations. One is hiding your identity, and second is identity revealed. How it matters? Let me take an example from tourism itself. In situations when we collect data, we have to reveal our identity in many cases. Why? Otherwise we will not get the required information. We will not be allowed even to attend some programs. But there is a type where identity is hidden. There are certain situations, sensitive situations. If you reveal your identity as a researcher, they will not allow you. So by hiding your identity and taking part in activity, that is called complete participant. And in the second case, hiding your identity and you are just observing, it is called complete observer case. And where you reveal your identity and you observe things without taking part, that is called observer as participant. In the next case, the researcher reveals the identity as a purpose and he becomes participant also. So participant as observer. Let me give you an example. Tribal communities, they have different festivals, and these festivals indicate maybe harvesting or change of seasons. If you want to note down the way they celebrate the festival, you have to be an observer, and you can also become a participant up to the level they allow you. So what do you observe? The way they celebrate the festival, the materials they use in that festival. In Telangana, there is a very popular festival called Samaka Saraka Yatra, in which community members from different parts of Andhra Pradesh and Telangana attend this festival. So it is a culturally rich program. If you are a social scientist, you can conduct a study. And how tourism is interesting, tourists want to see such kind of programs. You can easily conduct a study at your nearby place about the conduct of festivals through participant observation. So we have 3 different types of participant observation: primary, secondary and experiential data. Here the statement of observers that deals with the secondary observation, and the data on perception and feelings that is collected through experiential. So it helps us to gain insight on what is going on in an area. It helps the researchers to develop understanding even about the organizations. Now we will be going through the next phase of data collection called interviews. Interviews can be 3 types: structured, semi-structured or unstructured, that is totally informal. Interviews are a mechanism to collect qualitative data. Interviews are conducted with the help of scripted questions that we call structured, where you add questions based upon your experience which are not in the questionnaire, that we call semi-structured. And the last one is informal. Informal interviews, you don't have any structured question set. You want to get the insight of the respondent. So this is a widely used form, that interviews are a widely used form of data collection method by qualitative researchers. Here there are certain issues to be addressed. How many questions you want to ask? What would be the time frame for the interviews? And how the respondents answer to your question? And again, the content of the question, whether you are getting the real outcome, the required information from the respondent. So these issues are generally faced by a researcher while collecting data through interview method. So I have given some points which you can note. there are around 6 points which describes conducting interviews for qualitative research. The issue here comes, one is the reliability of the information, second is biasness, and third one is generalizability. We will see this in the coming slides in detail. So what is a common issue which we find? If you conduct interview and the participant is just giving yes no answer, no way it is going to help your research. We need rich data. So the in-depth information is required. Number two, if they give too long answers which is not from the context, somebody may tell or glorify their achievements rather than answering your questions. And then the research content and the process of where you conduct the interviews. Then you also prepared that at times they may criticize some points, or they may show their knowledge is more supreme or superior to you, what you are searching for. In some cases we can even find emotional outburst. Some people may get angry or upset. As a researcher, you have to be prepared for all these things. So dear students, let us conclude here. I started with different types of data collection. If you remember, in the beginning I spoke on qualitative data collection, then quantitative data collection, then we have seen the method specifically, that is interview method, and the issues that we face normally during the time of data collection, whether it is observation or whether it is interview based. So the context of the research is very important, and second is the researcher has to take an appropriate decision on which method is appropriate, how that method is going to help in the research or getting the ultimate result from your study. So with this we conclude, and in the next module we will go in detail about focus groups and the issue of quality of qualitative researchers. I hope you understood today's session. Thank you for your patient listening. Thank you.